Welcome to my Channel Deep Sleep Mission-DSM. As we begin, I would be delighted if you could share your location in the comments below. It's truly inspiring to witness how far this content travels and to connect with viewers from across the world. The text my grandfather left me wasn't a warning, it was an apology. Tommy, if you're reading this, I'm already gone. The mine at Millvale Road, don't let them reopen it. Whatever it takes, don't let them go sideways. That was 3 weeks ago. Now I'm standing here at 2:47 a.m., watching bulldozers tear through the chain-link fence that's kept this place sealed since 1987, and I can already hear it breathing. But wait, I need to tell you something first. Before we begin this story, before you get too comfortable in your bed tonight, know this. What happened in that mine is still happening right now as you listen. And by the time I finish telling you what I found, you'll understand why some mines go down to find coal, but the Millvale mine went sideways to find something else entirely. The story begins now. My name is Tom Brennan, and 3 weeks ago I inherited something I never wanted, a responsibility I never asked for. Grandpa Joe died on a Tuesday. Heart attack, they said. Natural causes. But the coroner didn't see the dirt under his fingernails. Dirt from a mine that's been closed for 37 years. The funeral was small. Just family, a few old-timers from the mining days. And me, standing in the October rain, wondering why a man who'd been retired for 2 decades still had coal dust in his lungs fresh enough to taste. After the service, his lawyer, a nervous little man named Peterson, handed me an envelope. "Your grandfather was very specific," he said, his hands shaking slightly. "You're to open this alone." Inside was the deed to 40 acres of land outside Millvale, a tiny town about 23 miles northeast of Pittsburgh. Along with it was that text message he'd somehow scheduled to send after his death. And a key, an old brass key with no explanation. I drove out there the next morning. The road turned from asphalt to gravel about 5 miles from town, then to dirt after another 2. The deeper I went into those Pennsylvania hills, the quieter everything became. Not peaceful quiet, expectant quiet, like the woods were holding their breath. The property was mostly overgrown forest now, but you could still see the bones of what it used to be. Rusted equipment poking through the kudzu like metal ribs. Railroad tracks that ended abruptly at a wall of earth. And there, cut into the hillside like a wound that wouldn't heal, the mine entrance, or what was left of it. Someone had sealed it years ago. Not just sealed, buried it. Concrete blocks, rebar, warning signs in 3 languages. Danger, peligro, and something else in symbols I didn't recognize. Behind all that, barely visible through a gap in the concrete. Darkness so thick it looked solid. I should have left then. Should have driven back to my apartment in Shadyside, forgotten about the whole thing. But that key in my pocket felt heavier than it should. And I kept thinking about those words. Don't let them go sideways. The lock was on a maintenance shed about 50 yards from the mine entrance. Inside, I found Grandpa Joe's real inheritance. 37 years of records, photographs, and something else. Something that made my blood run cold. Maps, not just any maps. Surveyor's charts of the mine from 1950 to 1987. And they were wrong, all wrong. See, here's what you need to understand about coal mines. They go down, always down, following the coal seams deep into the earth. The Millvale mine started that way too. The early maps from the 50s showed normal vertical shafts, just like every other mine in western Pennsylvania, but something changed in 1971. The maps from that year forward showed the mine branching off horizontally, not following any geological formation, just cutting straight sideways into the mountain. 16 different horizontal tunnels, each one perfectly straight, each one exactly 1,847 feet long. Why that number? Why sideways? The maps didn't say, but the photographs... God, the photographs told a different story. The first photo was dated June 15th, 1971. It showed my grandfather, young, maybe 30, standing with a group of miners at what looked like a standard coal face. Everyone was smiling except him. He was staring at something just outside the frame, and his expression. Have you ever seen someone realize they've made a terrible mistake? That moment when the smile dies but hasn't quite left their face. That was my grandfather in that photo. The next photo was taken 3 days later. Same crew, but now they were standing in front of something different. The coal face was gone. In its place was nothing. Just smooth, dark stone that seemed to absorb the camera's flash. And carved into that stone, barely visible, were those same symbols I'd seen on the warning signs. I found a journal, too, wrapped in oilcloth and hidden behind the filing cabinet. Grandpa Joe's handwriting, getting shakier as the entries progressed. June 18th, 1971. We broke through today. Davidson was running the drill when it happened. Said it felt like pushing through paper. The sound it made, like breathing. We should have stopped, should have sealed it. But Kowalski wants us to explore. Says the company's interested in geological anomalies. June 20th, 1971. The tunnels are already there. We're not digging them. We're just opening them. They go perfectly sideways, like someone drew them with a ruler. No supports needed. The rock doesn't crumble or shift. It's like it wants to stay open. June 25th, 1971. Davidson won't go back in. Says he hears singing when he gets near Tunnel 4. Beautiful singing, he says, like his mother's voice. His mother's been dead for 15 years. July 1st, 1971. We found the rooms today. The entry stopped there. The next one wasn't until 3 weeks later, and the handwriting was different. Desperate. July 23rd, 1971. They're making us go back. All of us. The company says we're imagining things, but I know what I saw in those rooms. Perfect cubes cut into the rock, each one exactly 10 feet by 10 feet by 10 feet, and in the center of each room, those things. They look like coal, black, shiny, about the size of a basketball. But coal doesn't pulse. Coal doesn't whisper your name when you walk past, and coal sure as hell doesn't know things about you that you've never told anyone. Kowalski touched one yesterday, just for a second. Now he won't stop smiling, won't stop talking about how beautiful it's going to be when everyone understands, when everyone goes sideways. I sat in that shed for hours, reading. The entries got worse, more frantic. Miners reporting lost time, finding themselves in tunnels they didn't remember entering, dreams about the mine calling them back. And then, November 1971, everything stopped. No more entries. But paper-clipped to the last page was a newspaper article from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Mining disaster leaves 13 dead, 4 missing in Millvale. The official story was a cave-in. The mine was sealed for safety reasons. End of story. Except there was one more photo, dated December 24th, 1987, 16 years after the disaster. It showed the mine entrance covered in fresh concrete, and standing in front of it were 5 men. I recognized one immediately. My grandfather, older now, holding a sledgehammer. The other four were the miners who'd gone missing in 1971. They hadn't aged a day. I left the shed in a daze. It was getting dark, and every shadow between the trees looked like it was moving, breathing. I practically ran to my car, Those photos and journal entries burning in my backpack like evidence of a crime. The drive back to Pittsburgh was a blur. I kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting to see, I don't know what. But the road stayed empty, and I made it home just as the streetlights came on. That night, I did what any rational person would do. I Googled everything. The Millvale Mine, the disaster, my grandfather's name. Most of it matched the official story, but there were gaps, big ones, like how the mining company, Brandywine Coal and Mineral, had dissolved just 3 days after the disaster. No bankruptcy, no sale, just gone. Like how all the survivors had moved away within a year, scattered across the country. Like how the land had been purchased by a trust in 1988. A trust managed by 5 unnamed individuals who paid the taxes every year without fail. Until 3 weeks ago, the day my grandfather died. My phone rang at 11 p.m. Unknown number, but local area code. Mr. Brennan, this is Richard Haverford from Allegheny Mining Consortium. I understand you've recently inherited some property we're very interested in. His voice was smooth, professional, and somehow wrong, like he was trying too hard to sound human. It's late, Mr. Haverford. I apologize for the hour, but time is somewhat critical. We're prepared to offer you $2 million for the Millvale property. Cash, we can close by Friday, $2 million, for 40 acres of useless forest and a sealed mine. I need to think about it. Of course. But Mr. Brennan, Tom, your grandfather was a practical man. He understood that some things are better left buried. We're simply offering you the chance to walk away wealthy, no questions asked. How did you know my grandfather? Silence. Then, everyone in the mining business knew Joe Brennan. He was instrumental in keeping Pennsylvania safe. We'd like to honor his memory by ensuring his grandson is well taken care of. What's in the mine? Nothing of value to anyone anymore, just old tunnels and bad memories. The money, however, is very real. Think about it, Tom. I'll call again tomorrow night. He hung up before I could respond. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those photos. Those 4 missing miners standing in 1987 like they'd just stepped out of 1971. And I kept thinking about what Grandpa Joe had written. Coal doesn't whisper your name when you walk past. The next morning, I did something stupid. I went back. I had to. The questions were eating at me, and something else. A pull, like when you stand at the edge of a cliff and some dark part of your brain whispers jump. Except this whisper was saying, go sideways. The property looked different in daylight, older. Like decades had passed overnight. The equipment was rustier, the vegetation thicker, and there were trucks, 3 of them parked near the mine entrance. Allegheny Mining Consortium painted on the sides. A bulldozer was already working on the concrete barriers. I parked behind some trees and watched. Haverford was there, tall, thin, wearing a suit despite the mud and dust. He was talking to a group of workers, pointing at the mine entrance. Then he stopped, turned, looked directly at where I was hidden, and smiled. Not a normal smile, too wide, too many teeth, like he was wearing a mask of a face and didn't quite know how to use it. I left, fast, but as I drove away, I heard it, or thought I did. Singing, beautiful singing, coming from the mine, like my mother's voice. My mother's been dead for 10 years. That night, Haverford called again. Tom, I trust you saw we've already begun preliminary work. The sale is really just a formality at this point. I haven't agreed to anything. No? Then why did you sign the papers? What papers? I haven't signed. Check your email, Tom. I did. There was a message from 3 hours ago, from my own email address. Attached were signed contracts selling the property to Allegheny Mining. The signature looked exactly like mine, but I hadn't sent it, hadn't signed anything. This is fraud. I'll call the police." You could try. But Tom, have you been feeling all right lately? Any lost time? Blackouts? It would be terrible if you were suffering from the same condition that affected your grandfather in his final days. You son of a... We're going to open the mind, Tom. It wants to be opened. Has wanted it for so long. Your grandfather kept it waiting, but patience has limits. Even for things that exist sideways to time. What's in there? What are those things in the rooms? He laughed. It sounded like stones grinding together. Doors, Tom. They're doors. And behind every door is a place where the rules are different. Where time moves sideways instead of forward. Where the things that whisper in the dark are just trying to teach us a better way to exist. You're insane. Am I? Your grandfather touched one, you know. Just once, in 1971. That's how he knew to seal the mine. That's how he knew to gather the others, the ones who'd already gone through. They came back to help him, because even paradise gets lonely when you're the only one there. The missing miners. Not missing. Just sideways. Waiting. They've been waiting so patiently, Tom. But now your grandfather's gone, and the seal is breaking. And soon everyone will understand what it means to go sideways. I hung up, threw the phone across the room. But I could still hear him talking. Or maybe it was the mine itself, whispering through the walls of my apartment. Come back, Tom. Come see what your grandfather was hiding. Come understand why we dig sideways instead of down. I didn't go back for 3 days. Told myself I was done, that it wasn't my problem. Let them open their mine. Let them find whatever nightmare was waiting in those sideways tunnels. But the dreams wouldn't stop. Every night I was in those tunnels, walking sideways through perfectly carved stone while something sang in the darkness ahead. And in the dreams, it made sense. Perfect sense. Why fight gravity when you can simply ignore it? Why live forward when sideways is so much more interesting? On the third night, I woke up in my car, engine running, parked outside the mine, 3 a.m. I had no memory of driving there. The entrance was completely clear now. The concrete was gone, the warning signs removed. Light spilled out from inside. Not electric light. Something older, softer, like candlelight if candles could burn without flame. There were others there. 12 people, maybe more, standing in a semicircle around the entrance. All in pajamas and robes, like they'd been called from their beds. All staring at the mine with the same empty expression. Haverford stood at the entrance, still in that same suit, still wearing that not quite right smile. Welcome back, Tom. I knew you'd come. They always do. The families of those who've guarded the seal. The connection is too strong to resist. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. None of us could move. Your grandfather was selfish, Tom. He found paradise and tried to keep it from the world. But paradise isn't meant to be hoarded. It's meant to be shared. He gestured to the mine entrance. Shall I tell you what really happened in 1971? What your grandfather really found? The air shimmered, and suddenly I could see into the mine. Not with my eyes, with something else. Something that had been growing inside me since I'd first touched that brass key. The tunnels were full of light. That same soft, impossible light. And they weren't empty. People walked through them. Hundreds of people. But they weren't walking on the floor. They walked on the walls, the ceiling, at angles that hurt to perceive, all moving sideways through space, untethered from the pull of the earth. And they were smiling. All of them. Perfectly, endlessly happy. The coal miners thought they were digging for fuel, Haverford said. But they were really digging for freedom. Freedom from the tyranny of linear time. Freedom from the prison of three-dimensional thinking. I watched my grandfather in the vision. Young, terrified, standing in one of those cube rooms. The black sphere in the center wasn't pulsing. It was rotating through dimensions I couldn't name, showing glimpses of places that shouldn't exist. He reached out, and I saw everything. I saw the truth of the sideways place, a world where every moment exists simultaneously, where you can step left out of Tuesday and arrive in next September, where death is just a direction you choose not to walk. It was beautiful. It was horrible. It was calling my name. That's why he sealed it, I gasped, the vision breaking. Not to keep it in, to keep us out. Because once you go sideways, you can never truly come back, Haverford finished. Oh, you can visit. The four who went through in 71, they visited your grandfather every Christmas Eve for 16 years, helped him maintain the seal. But they were never really here. Just projections. Shadows cast from a sideways angle. And now? Now the last guardian is dead. The seal is broken, and the mine is calling everyone home. The others began walking forward, slow, dreamlike steps toward the entrance. I tried to resist, but my body moved anyway. Don't fight it, Tom. Your grandfather fought for 37 years, and what did it get him? A heart attack at 73 alone in his kitchen, clawing at the air like he could tear a hole back to 1971. We were at the entrance now. The singing was louder, so beautiful it made my teeth ache. I could see down the main tunnel, perfectly straight, impossibly long, and at the far end, getting closer without moving. The four missing miners. Still young, still smiling, still wearing their work clothes from 1971. Tommy, one of them said, and I recognized him from the photos. Davidson. Your grandpa told us about you. Showed us pictures. You look just like him. Is he? I couldn't finish the question. He's sideways now, Davidson said gently, where he always belonged. Where we all belong. Come on, kid. Let us show you what we found. I took a step into the mine. The ground shifted. Not like an earthquake. Like gravity forgot which way was down. Suddenly, I was standing on the wall, but it felt like the floor. The others were scattered across all surfaces, each one oriented to their own personal gravity. The first rule of sideways, Haverford said, walking up the ceiling like it was nothing, is that there are no rules. Only choices. We went deeper. The tunnels branched and merged in ways that shouldn't work. Sometimes we walked through the same space from different angles, passing through each other like ghosts. Time stuttered and flowed backward. I saw myself entering the mine before I'd arrived, saw myself leaving before I'd decided to stay. And then we reached the first room. The sphere was waiting. It wasn't black anymore. It was every color that had never existed, showing me places between places, worlds that existed in the gaps between seconds. And in all of them, everyone was smiling that same empty smile. Touch it, Davidson urged. Just once. That's all it takes. I reached out, and my grandfather's hand grabbed my wrist. Not young Joe. Old Joe the way I remembered him. Covered in coal dust and dirt, his eyes wild but clear. Run, Tommy. Run. Now. The mind screamed. Not with sound, with existence itself. The walls began to fold. The ceiling became the floor, and gravity went to war with itself. The others, Haverford, Davidson, the sleepwalkers. They scattered like leaves in a hurricane that blew in all directions at once. You died, I gasped, as Grandpa Joe pulled me through tunnels that kept trying to turn inside out. Death is just a direction, he said, and I chose to go sideways one last time, to wait for you, to fix my mistake. We ran through impossible angles while the mine fought us, but Grandpa Joe knew the way. He'd been walking these tunnels for 37 years. even when his body was elsewhere. "The spheres aren't doors," he said as we ran. "They're eggs. Things from the sideways place waiting to hatch. And when they do, when enough people touch them, our whole world tilts, becomes like this place, no up, no down, no forward or back, just endless sideways forever." We burst out of the mine into dawn light, real light. The others were still inside, lost in their sideways dreams. "Burn it," Grandpa Joe said, and his voice was fading. "Burn it all." He handed me a can of gasoline that hadn't been there a second ago, or maybe had always been there, waiting sideways for this moment. "I can't hold the fold much longer, Tommy. Once I let go, they'll come pouring out. All of them, everyone who's ever touched the spheres, everyone who's ever dreamed of going sideways. Do it now." I doused the entrance, the support beams, everything I could reach. The mine tried to stop me. Gravity kept shifting, trying to pull the gasoline up instead of down. But I held on to the one true thing I knew. Fire doesn't care about direction. Fire just burns. I lit the match. The mine screamed again as flames raced into its mouth. But this time, the scream had words. "You can't burn a direction, Tom. You can't kill a concept. We'll find another way, another mine, another fool who digs sideways instead of down." Grandpa Joe smiled sadly. "Maybe, but not today. Not here. Not through my grandson." He faded like smoke, and with him went the impossible light. The mine entrance collapsed, not from the fire, but from something else, like reality itself was sealing the wound. I drove away as sirens approached. Let them find the wreckage, let them wonder, let them blame me if they wanted. 3 days later, I got a call from Peterson, the lawyer. "Mr. Brennan, I have good news. The sale of your grandfather's property has been reversed. Apparently there was some kind of fraud involved. The mining company doesn't seem to exist anymore." "What about the mine?" "What mine?" "According to the county records, there's never been a mine on that property." I hung up, checked the photos on my phone, the ones I'd taken of Grandpa Joe's journal. They were all blank. The only thing left was a single text message. "Not from my grandfather's number, from mine." Sent to myself 3 seconds ago, though I hadn't touched the phone. Some things are better left buried. Some directions better left unexplored. But Tommy, they're still out there, still digging, still looking for places where the world is thin enough to break through. Watch for the minds that go sideways. Watch for the people who smile too much. And whatever you do, never touch the spheres. Love, Grandpa Joe. P.S. Check your basement. I did. There, wrapped in oilcloth and hidden behind my water heater, was a box I'd never seen before. Inside were maps, dozens of them, all showing mines across Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia, all with tunnels that went sideways, all with rooms marked in red ink, all with dates in the future. The nearest one is scheduled to break through next month, 17 miles from where you're listening to this right now. I'm telling you this story because I can't watch them all, can't stop them all. But maybe if enough people know, if enough people understand, we can keep the world from tilting. Keep reality from going sideways. So before you fall asleep tonight, remember this. If you ever find yourself near a mine that doesn't dig down, if you ever hear singing that sounds like someone you've lost, if you ever meet someone whose smile is touchid and whose gravity seems wrong, run. Run, and don't look back. Because the sideways place is patient. It's been waiting far longer than coal has existed, far longer than humans have been digging. And one day, when enough people have touched those spheres, when enough doors have been opened, we'll all wake up walking on the walls, still smiling, still perfectly, endlessly happy. still wondering why we ever thought down was the only way to fall. Sweet dreams. Story number 2. They say Alcatraz has been empty since 1963. The thermal cameras tell a different story, especially when it comes to cell 23. Look, I need you to understand something before I tell you what happened. I'm not crazy, I'm not looking for attention, and I definitely didn't believe in any of this stuff before last Tuesday. But if you're listening to this right now, lying in your bed, maybe with the lights already off, you deserve to know the truth about what's still living in that cell. And yes, I said living. Now the story begins. My name is Marcus Chen, and until last week, I was just another security systems technician from San Francisco. You know the type: khakis, polo shirt with the company logo, drove a white van full of cables and monitors. The kind of guy you'd forget 5 minutes after he fixed your Wi-Fi. The call came in on a Monday afternoon. Government contract. Big money. Installation of new thermal imaging systems at Alcatraz. They were upgrading the whole island's security for the tourist season. Routine stuff, or so I thought. Cell House D needs special attention, my supervisor Randy had said, sliding the work order across his cluttered desk. His fingers drummed against the cheap laminate. Tap, 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 like he was nervous about something. Particularly the second tier. The client was specific about that. I shrugged. Government clients were always weird about random details. Sure, Randy. Whatever they want. He looked at me for a long moment. Too long. Marcus, just follow the installation protocols exactly, okay? Don't improvise on this one. That should have been my first warning. Tuesday morning came foggy and cold. The kind of San Francisco weather that seeps through your jacket no matter how many layers you wear. The ferry to Alcatraz was nearly empty. Just me, 2 German tourists with massive cameras, and an elderly park ranger named Bill, who'd been working the island since the 80s. "You're the thermal camera guy?" Bill asked, his weathered hands wrapped around a thermos of coffee that smelled like it could strip paint. "That's me," he nodded slowly. "They tell you which cells you're working on?" "All of them, eventually, starting with D block today." Something flickered across his face. Fear? No. More like resignation. Like when you know something bad's coming but you can't stop it. "Cell 23, he said quietly. "When you get to cell 23, work fast. Don't linger." I laughed, actually laughed. "What, is it haunted or something?" Bill didn't smile back. He just stared out at the approaching island, at those concrete walls rising from the fog like broken teeth. Something like that. The installation started normally enough. D-block was exactly what you'd expect. Cold, damp, endless rows of cells that seemed to swallow sound. Each cell was maybe 6 by 9 feet, a toilet, a sink, a narrow bed frame. Some still had thin mattresses rotting slowly in the salt air. I worked methodically. Cell 1, mount the camera, run the cables, test the connection. Cell 2, same thing. The thermal imaging showed exactly what you'd expect. Cold concrete, colder metal. The occasional warm spot where sunlight hit through the high windows. Cell 21, cell 22, then I reached. Cell 23. The temperature dropped the moment I stepped in front of it. Not gradually, instantly. Like walking into a freezer. My breath came out in clouds, which made no sense because cell 22, literally 3 feet away, had been normal. I checked my phone. 52 degrees in cell 22. 34 degrees at cell 23. The cell itself looked identical to the others. Same rusted bars, same peeling paint, same cramped dimensions. But something was wrong. You know that feeling when you're sure someone's watching you? That prickle on the back of your neck? That primal awareness that you're not alone? That's what cell 23 felt like. I mounted the thermal camera quickly, probably too quickly. My fingers fumbling with the brackets, just wanted to get it done and move on. Connected the cables, powered it up, checked the feed on my tablet. The screen showed the cell in that familiar rainbow of thermal imaging. Blue for cold surfaces, green for ambient temperature, yellow and orange for warmer areas. But there was something else. In the corner of the cell, right where the bed met the wall, was a shape, human-shaped, glowing orange and red like a living person. The thermal signature was clear as day. Someone was sitting on that bed, knees drawn up, head down, arms wrapped around their legs. Except the cell was empty. I looked up from the tablet. Looked directly into cell 23, nothing there, just shadows and rust. Looked back at the screen. The figure was still there, still glowing with body heat, still perfectly still. My hands started shaking. Must be a malfunction, had to be. Old building, weird temperature variations, probably just thermal reflection from the pipes in the walls. I recalibrated the camera, checked all the connections, ran a diagnostic. The figure remained, and then it moved, the thing on the thermal imaging. It lifted its head, slowly, like it knew I was watching. I dropped the tablet. It clattered on the concrete floor, the sound echoing through D block like a gunshot. When I scrambled to pick it up, hands shaking so bad I could barely grip it, the screen had gone dark, battery disconnected from the fall. "Everything okay up there?" Bill's voice drifted up from the lower level. "Yeah," I called back, my voice cracking like I was 13 again. Just dropped something. I should have left right then. Should have packed up my tools, told Randy the equipment was defective, gone home to my apartment in the Mission District and forgotten all about cell 23, but I didn't. Because I'm an idiot. Because I needed this job. Because I thought there had to be a logical explanation. I reconnected the tablet battery, waited for it to boot up, pulled up the thermal feed again. The cell appeared empty. Normal temperature distribution. No mysterious heat signatures. See? Just a glitch. Probably interference from something. Old wiring, maybe. I made some notes in my installation log, flagged the camera for additional testing, and moved on to cell 24. But I kept the thermal feed from cell 23 open in a small window on my tablet, just to monitor it, just to make sure. For the next 2 hours, nothing happened. I installed cameras in cells 24 through 35, ran cable through the ventilation shafts, set up the main monitoring station in what used to be the guards' break room. Normal, boring, technical work. The kind of stuff I'd done 100 times before. Around noon, I was eating my sandwich, turkey and Swiss from the subway on Van Ness, when movement on the tablet caught my eye. The heat signature was back. This time, it was standing, right in the middle of cell 23. The thermal image showed it clearly. Head, shoulders, arms, legs. The proportions were wrong somehow. Too tall, arms too long. But definitely humanoid. I put down my sandwich and walked back to cell 23. Stood right in front of the bars. Looked inside. Empty. Checked the tablet. The figure was there, standing exactly where I was looking. Close enough that if the bars weren't between us, it could have reached out and touched me. "You can see me." The voice came from inside the cell. Quiet. Raspy. Like someone who hadn't spoken in years. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my tool bag. "Who's there?" Silence. "This isn't funny," I said, trying to sound authoritative. Failing miserably. "If someone's in there, you need to come out. This is a restricted area, nothing. Just the sound of wind through the barred windows and the distant cry of seagulls." I forced myself to step closer. Grabbed my flashlight, one of those heavy mag lights that doubles as a club if needed, and shined it into every corner of the cell. The beam cut through the shadows, revealing nothing but concrete and rust. But on the thermal camera, the figure remained. And now it was moving, pacing, back and forth, like a caged animal. "You can see me," the voice said again, definitely coming from inside the cell. It's been so long since anyone could see me. My rational brain was screaming at me to run, but there was something in that voice, something desperate and lonely and utterly human, that kept me frozen in place. "Who are you?" I whispered. The pacing stopped. On the thermal feed, the figure turned toward me. "I don't remember." Those 3 words hit me harder than they should have. There was such loss in them, such complete devastation. "How long have you been here?" Time doesn't. A pause. The sound of breathing, though I couldn't tell if it was real or my imagination. "They put me in solitary. Said I killed someone. Maybe I did. I don't remember that either. Just the dark, the cold, the waiting. I checked my phone, started recording. I needed proof of this. Are you dead?" A laugh, bitter and broken. "I don't know. Am I? I can't leave, can't die, can't live, just exist. In between." The thermal figure sat down again. That same position I'd first seen. Knees up, head down, arms wrapped tight. The temperature in the cell dropped another 5 degrees. "The cameras," the voice said. "Your cameras. They see heat, right? See the energy things give off? Yeah, thermal imaging. I'm not heat. Not anymore. I'm something else. The absence of heat. The memory of warmth. Your machine sees me because it sees what's missing. That didn't make sense. Thermal cameras don't work that way. They detect infrared radiation, not the absence of it. But then again, nothing about this made sense. "What's your name?" I asked. Silence for so long, I thought it wouldn't answer. "Tommy. I think my name was Tommy. Tommy Garrett. I made a note to look that up later. See if there was a record of a Tommy Garrett at Alcatraz. Tommy, I'm Marcus. I'm sorry you're stuck here." The figure on the thermal feed lifted its head. "You're the first person to say that. The first to say my name in." The temperature dropped again. 29 degrees now. My breath came out in thick clouds. "They're all here, you know," Tommy said suddenly. "All of us who died in solitary, stuck in our cells. Most have gone quiet, given up trying. But some are angry, really angry. How many? 14 cells in D block, 14 of us. But cell 14, don't go near cell 14. He's not like me. He remembers what he did. And he liked it. I should have run. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to get out of D block, off the island, away from whatever was happening in cell 23, but I stayed. Because Tommy sounded so desperately lonely. Because my tablet was recording everything. Because I needed to understand. "Tell me about the others," I said, sitting down on the cold concrete floor. My back against the wall opposite cell 23. The thermal figure shifted. "You really want to know?" "Yeah." Cell 11 has Matches Morrison. Set fire to his cellmate and general population. They put him in solitary until trial, but he hung himself with his bedsheet first night. Still thinks he's burning. Temperature in his cell stays at 97 degrees even in winter. I made a note to check cell 11's thermal reading later. Cell 18 is Silent Pete. Never spoke a word his whole time here. Guards thought he was mute. Wasn't, just refused to talk. Died of pneumonia in 1954. Now he won't stop whispering, but only between 3 and 4 in the morning. What does he say? Names. Every person who ever hurt him, over and over. The list is long. A gust of wind rattled through the cell block. Somewhere, a door slammed shut. I jumped, then felt embarrassed. It was just wind, old building, natural causes. But cell 14, Tommy continued, his voice dropping even lower. William Boggs, the painter, they called him. Not because he painted pictures. Then why? Because he painted with blood. 3 guards, 2 inmates. Would have been more if they hadn't caught him. Spent 7 years in cell 14 before he died. Heart attack, officially. But the guards, they knew what really happened. What really happened. He tried to leave, to escape his cell. Not physically. Something else, something worse. The thing he became. It killed him, trying to get out. But it didn't die with him. It's still in there, still trying to escape. The temperature reading from cell 14 suddenly spiked on my master monitoring screen. 73, 89, 104, 127 degrees. Don't look at it, Tommy said urgently. Don't use the thermal camera on cell 14. It knows when it's being watched. It feeds on attention. I quickly closed the cell 14 feed. The temperature immediately started dropping back to normal. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because you can see us. Because your machines make us real again, even if just for a moment. Because, he paused, because something's changing. We've been stuck here for decades, same routines, same emptiness, but recently something's different. We can feel it. Feel what? The wall's getting thinner. The boundary between your world and ours. It started about a month ago. Little things at first. Tourists hearing voices, cameras malfunctioning, cold spots where there shouldn't be any. A month ago, that's when the Park Service had ordered the new security system. Had they known? Is that why they wanted thermal imaging specifically? Tommy, do you know why? Someone's coming, he interrupted. I heard it too. Footsteps on the metal stairs. Slow. Deliberate. Bill appeared at the top of the landing, his face grim. You need to finish up and leave now. I've still got 6 more cells to... Now, son. Storm coming in. Ferries leaving early. I looked out the window. The sky was clear. No sign of any storm. Bill's eyes flicked to cell 23, then back to me. You've been talking to him, haven't you? To Tommy? My mouth fell open. You know about, we all know. Every ranger who's worked nights, every maintenance worker who's been in D-Block alone. We don't talk about it, don't report it, because what would we say? That Alcatraz is exactly what everyone jokes about? Actually haunted? He helped me gather my tools, deliberately not looking at any of the cells. 43 years I've been here, he said quietly. 43 years of pretending they're not here, of ignoring the voices, the cold spots, the things that move in the corner of your eye. It's the only way to stay sane. But the thermal cameras will make it worse. He grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong. Don't you get it? They've been invisible for decades, forgotten, fading. Your cameras make them visible again, give them form, power. The more people who see them, the more real they become. We were at the stairs now. As we descended, I looked back at cell 23 for just a moment, a split second. I could have sworn I saw someone standing behind the bars, not on the tablet, with my actual eyes. A tall, gaunt figure in prison grays, watching me leave. Finish the installation if you have to, Bill said as we walked toward the dock. But don't activate the system. Don't let anyone monitor those feeds. And whatever you do, don't put them online. The ferry ride back was silent. Bill stood at the rail, staring back at the island. I sat inside, reviewing the thermal footage on my tablet, frame by frame, trying to make sense of it. That's when I saw it, in the recording from cell 23 just before Bill arrived. The thermal figure had stood up, walked to the bars and raised its hand, like it was waving goodbye, or reaching out for help. And in cell 14, despite closing the feed, The camera had kept recording. The heat signature there wasn't human-shaped. It was wrong, twisted, too many angles, too many limbs, and it was moving, pressing against the walls of its cell, testing them, looking for weak points. I didn't go back to Alcatraz the next day. Called in sick. Spent hours researching instead. Tommy Garrett was real, died in cell 23 on November 17, 1958. Pneumonia, according to the death certificate. But the guard reports told a different story. Found dead in his cell after spending 3 days in complete silence. No signs of illness before that. Just stopped eating, stopped moving, stopped responding like he'd given up. The painter, William Boggs, was real too. Died June 6, 1961. The official report said heart attack. But I found a guard's personal journal in the online archives. The entry for that night was disturbing. Boggs, screaming all night, says something's crawling inside his skin. Wants to get out. Clawing at himself. Blood everywhere. When we found him at morning count, his fingernails were torn off, scratches all over his body. Heart gave out from the stress. Good riddance. But Martinez swears he saw something else in that cell. Something dark, moving. Says it went into the walls when we opened the door. Thursday morning, Randy called. "Marcus, I need you back at Alcatraz. System's not fully operational. The client is getting impatient. Randy, there's something wrong with... I don't care if there's something wrong. Fix it. That's what we're paying you for." So I went back. Because I needed the job, because I thought maybe I'd imagined it all, because I'm an idiot. The island was covered in fog so thick I couldn't see 10 feet ahead. Bill wasn't on duty. Some younger ranger I didn't recognize checked me through. Didn't say a word. Just handed me the keys to D block and pointed toward the prison. The cell block was freezing, every breath visible. My footsteps echoed like gunshots. The monitoring station showed all the feeds from the cameras I'd installed. 35 cells. 35 thermal images, and in 14 of them there were figures. Not just Tommy in cell 23, all of them. Every one Tommy had warned me about. Cell 11 matches Morrison. Showed as a writhing mass of heat, constantly moving, temperature spiking and dropping like a heartbeat. Cell 18, Silent Pete, was a cold spot so dark it looked like a hole in reality. And cell 14, I couldn't look away from cell 14. The thing in there had changed, grown. It filled the entire cell now, pressing against every surface. The thermal image showed temperatures that shouldn't be possible. 200 degrees, 300, rising. "You came back." Tommy's voice, but not from cell 23, from right behind me. I spun around, nothing there, but the temperature plummeted. "We can leave the cells now," Tommy said. His voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "Your cameras, they're like doors, windows. We can see through them, move through them. On the monitors, all 14 figures stepped out of their cells simultaneously. The thermal images showed them clearly, walking through the bars like they weren't there. "We don't want to hurt anyone," Tommy continued. "We just want to leave. To finally leave. We've been trapped here so long. How?" I asked the empty air. "How do I help you leave?" "The system. Put it online, let people see us. The more eyes on us, the more real we become. Real enough to break free completely." Every instinct screamed this was wrong. But Tommy sounded so desperate, so hopeful. "What about Boggs?" The painter, silence. "Tommy? He's different. He doesn't want to leave. He wants to spread, to grow, to paint the world the way he painted his cell. But we can contain him. We have for years. Just help us." I looked at the monitoring station. One button would activate the live feed. Stream all 35 cameras directly to the Park Service headquarters. To the public website, to anyone who wanted to watch. One button on Cell 14's feed, the temperature hit 400 degrees. The thing inside was taking shape, becoming more defined, more real. And it was looking at the camera, looking at me. I reached for the button and stopped, because I remembered what Bill had said: the more people who see them, the more real they become. And if they became real enough... I'm sorry, Tommy. I can't. The temperature dropped so fast, ice formed on the windows. Every monitor started flickering. Static. Then images. Not thermal anymore. Actual video. 14 prisoners in striped uniforms standing in the middle of D block. Transparent but visible. Tommy was right in front of me, tall, gaunt, hollow-eyed. He looked exactly as desperate as he sounded. "Please," he said, "we just want to rest, to move on. We're so tired of being trapped." I looked at him, at all of them. 14 souls stuck in the worst kind of limbo. Then I looked at Cell 14's monitor. The thing in there wasn't a soul. It was something else. Something that used to be human, but had become worse. If I let you go, he goes too. Tommy's face fell. "We can control him." "We have before." "No, you've contained him. There's a difference." I started disconnecting the cameras, one by one. Each time I pulled a cable, one of the figures flickered and faded. "Please!" Tommy grabbed my arm. I felt it. Ice-cold pressure, real physical contact. "Don't make us go back to the dark, please. I'm sorry." And I was. God, I was so sorry. But I can't risk it. I can't risk him getting out. I pulled the cable for Cell 23. Tommy disappeared mid-scream. One by one, I disconnected them all. Saved Cell 14 for last. When I finally pulled that cable, the thing inside, I swear it laughed, low, rumbling. Like it knew it would get another chance someday. I left all the equipment there. Told Randy it was unsalvageable. Got fired. Worth it. But here's the thing. The thing that keeps me awake at night. The Park Service didn't remove the cameras. They're still there, still functional, just not connected. And last week they put out a new contract. Another company, another technician. Someone who doesn't know what I know. Someone who might push that button. So, if you're listening to this, if you ever visit Alcatraz, and you see Cell 23, or any cell in D block, don't look too long. Don't take thermal photos. Don't use infrared. Don't give them form. Because Tommy was wrong about one thing. They don't need the cameras to escape. They just need enough people to believe, to see, to make them real. And every year, 1.5 million tourists visit Alcatraz. How many would it take? 100 seeing something strange, 1,000. 10,000 sharing photos online of mysterious heat signatures. How many eyes until the boundary breaks completely? I still have the thermal footage on my tablet. Sometimes, late at night, I look at it. And I swear the figures are clearer now. More defined. Like they're getting stronger even through the recording. Last night, I could have sworn I saw Tommy wave at me. And behind him, in Cell 14, something massive and dark and patient, waiting for its chance. Still waiting. Still growing. The question is, are you going to Alcatraz anytime soon? Are you bringing a camera, an iPhone with thermal imaging apps? Are you the one who's going to finally give them enough power to break free? Sweet dreams. Oh, and one more thing. If you're lying in bed right now and you feel a sudden cold spot beside you, that's probably just your imagination. Probably. But Tommy did say they could move through cameras. And you're looking at a screen right now, aren't you? Your phone, your tablet, your laptop. How many cameras are pointing at you at this very moment? Don't look behind you. Story number 3. The radio static hits different at 2:47 a.m. Always has, always will. That's what Officer Mike Brennan learned 17 years ago. and what I'm learning tonight as I ride along in his 1975 Plymouth Fury squad car. The thing about old police cruisers is they remember things. Every creak in the vinyl seats, every scratch on the bulletproof glass divider, every blood stain that won't quite wash out of the floorboards. The coffee stain on the dashboard has been there so long it's fossilized, turned into something that looks more like a map than a spill. A map of nowhere I recognize, with roads that twist back on themselves and destinations marked with symbols that hurt to look at directly. Brennan caught me staring at it earlier and covered it with his clipboard. "Don't," was all he said. But the way he said it, with the weight of someone who'd made that mistake before, told me everything I needed to know about looking too closely at things in Unit 23. "You picked a hell of a night for a ride-along, kid," Brennan mutters, his fingers drumming against the worn steering wheel. The speedometer needle bounces between 35 and 40, even though we're doing a steady 30 down Maple Street. That's another thing about these old cars. They lie to you. Saturday nights in Millbrook aren't what they used to be. The dashboard lights flicker as he speaks, casting strange shadows across his face. For just a moment, he looks younger, much younger, like a man who's been 25 years old for far longer than that's possible. Then the lights steady, and he's middle-aged again, with crow's feet that could have been carved by decades of squinting into darkness. I adjust my civilian observer vest, the fluorescent yellow making me feel like a target rather than protected. "What do you mean?" He doesn't answer right away. Instead, he reaches for his coffee, black, lukewarm, probably his 5th cup since his shift started at 11 p.m. The steam fogs up his glasses for a second, and in that moment, I swear I see something move in the back seat through the rearview mirror. But when I turn, nothing. Just worn vinyl and the ghost of every drunk, every criminal, every lost soul who ever sat back there. The vinyl has patterns in it now that I'm looking closer. Faces, maybe. Or maybe that's just pareidolia, the human brain's desperate need to find meaning in random shapes. But these faces seem to shift when I'm not looking directly at them, like they're having conversations I'm not supposed to hear. "Tell me something," Brennan says, taking a long sip. "You ever wonder why this department still keeps one 1975 cruiser in service? Everything else got upgraded to Crown Vics back in '98, but not old Unit 23 here. Budget constraints?" I offer, though even as I say it, I know that's not right. The Millbrook PD got a federal grant 2 years ago. New equipment, new cars, new everything. Except Unit 23 stays exactly as it was, down to the AM radio that only picks up stations that went off the air in 1983. Brennan laughs, but there's no humor in it. "Kid, this car's worth more than my house. Not to collectors. Hell, you couldn't sell this thing if you tried. But to the department, to the town, this car's priceless. Irreplaceable, because some things." He pauses, choosing his words carefully. Some things aren't about money. They're about necessity, about keeping the balance. Before I can answer, the radio crackles to life. But it's not dispatch. It's just breathing, slow, deliberate, like someone's holding down the transmit button and waiting. The breathing has a rhythm to it. In for 7 counts, out for 7 counts, over and over. It's almost hypnotic, and I find myself matching the pattern without realizing it. Brennan notices immediately. "Don't," he snaps, reaching over to shake my shoulder. "Don't sync up with it. That's how it gets in. That's how it learns your frequency. What gets in?" But he's already grabbed the radio, breaking the spell. "Unit 23 to dispatch, you copy?" Silence, then, Mike, it's happening again." The voice is wrong. It sounds like dispatch, same woman, Betty, who's been working nights for 30 years. But there's something underneath it, like 2 people talking at once, like an echo that comes before the sound. I've heard Betty's voice before. She handled my paperwork when I signed up for the ride-along program. Sweet woman, grandmotherly, the kind who keeps homemade cookies in the break room and remembers everyone's birthday. But this voice, this thing wearing Betty's voice like an ill-fitting mask, makes my skin crawl. It's trying too hard to sound human, overcompensating in ways that make it worse than if it hadn't tried at all. Betty? Brennan's knuckles go white on the steering wheel. Betty, what's your 20? But the radio goes dead. Not static dead, dead, like someone pulled the plug. That's when I notice we're not on Maple Street anymore. The street signs are still there, but they're wrong. Maple Street, the sign says. But this isn't Maple Street. Maple Street has the Johnson's Blue House on the corner, with the Garden Gnome collection and the perpetually broken fence. This street has a house that's almost the Johnson place, but the gnomes are facing the wrong way, and the fence is perfectly intact, but made from wood that looks like it was cut yesterday from trees that died a century ago. And now, the story begins. I check my phone. No signal. The clock reads 2:51 a.m., but I could swear we've been driving for longer than 4 minutes. The street signs are gone, or maybe they were never there. The houses look wrong, like someone tried to draw Millbrook from memory but kept getting the details mixed up. That blue colonial on the corner, it's supposed to have white shutters, not black. The Andersons' mailbox should be on the left side of their driveway, not the right. More than that, the houses feel empty. Not just unoccupied, empty in a way that suggests they were never really lived in at all. Windows that reflect nothing. Driveways with car-shaped stains but no cars. Mailboxes with names that shift and blur when you try to read them directly. Brennan, I start, but he holds up a hand. First rule of Saturday night patrol, he says, eyes locked on the road ahead. When things get weird, you don't acknowledge it. You keep driving, you do your job, and you pray to whatever you believe in that the sun comes up on schedule. His voice has changed. It's still Brennan's voice, but there's something underneath it now. Something older. More tired than any human voice should be. Like he's been saying these words for longer than he's been alive. The headlights catch something in the road. A shape. Human-sized, but not quite human-shaped. Brennan doesn't slow down, doesn't swerve. Just drives straight through it like it's fog. And maybe it is. Maybe my eyes are playing tricks. The impact that isn't an impact leaves a taste in my mouth. Copper. Fear. Something else I can't identify but that makes my hindbrain scream warnings I don't understand. The shape, whatever it was, felt solid for just a moment. Solid and cold and desperately hungry. Second rule, he continues, downshifting as we approach what should be the intersection of Maple and 3rd. Never look directly at the passengers in the back seat. Use the mirror if you have to, but never turn around. There's no one, not yet. But as soon as he says it, I feel the weight shift in the car. The suspension settles slightly, like someone just got in. The rearview mirror shows nothing, but the feeling persists. Someone is back there. Someone is watching. Someone is waiting. The radio crackles again. This time it's not Betty. It's a man's voice, young, scared. Unit 23, Unit 23, this is Unit 19. I need backup at God, where am I? The street signs are all wrong. Everything's wrong. Brennan, if you can hear this, the transmission cuts to a scream. Not a Hollywood scream. A real one. The kind that makes your primitive brain want to run before your conscious mind even processes what it heard. It's the scream of someone who's just realized they're not where they thought they were, that they're not who they thought they were, that the world is a much stranger, much more dangerous place than they ever imagined. It's the scream of enlightenment, and it's the worst sound I've ever heard. Brennan floors it. The old V8 engine roars, and suddenly we're doing 70 down residential streets. but the houses just blur past, same ones over and over. The Anderson place, the Blue Colonial, a ranch style that burned down in 1987 but somehow stands intact tonight. Unit 19 is Tommy Martinez, Brennan says through gritted teeth. Good kid. 3 years on the force. Has a baby daughter, his voice cracks. Had a baby daughter. What do you mean, had? But I already know. The same way I know that the figure standing on the sidewalk up ahead, the one in the police uniform, isn't really Tommy Martinez, can't be. Because Tommy Martinez is still screaming on the radio, even though the radio's been off for the last 2 minutes. The figure steps into the road. Brennan doesn't slow down. Close your eyes, he orders. I don't. I should have. The thing wearing Tommy's face smiles as we pass through it, and for just a second I see what's underneath, what's always been underneath. Millbrook isn't a town. It's a mouth, and every Saturday night it gets hungry. The impact that wasn't an impact leaves me gasping. My chest feels cold, like someone reached through my ribs and squeezed. Brennan's still driving, following a route that makes no sense. Left on Willow, right on Main, straight through the intersection that shouldn't exist because Main dead ends at the water tower. Except tonight it doesn't. The water tower is still there, but it's wrong. Too tall, too thin, and the words painted on its side, which should read Millbrook Estates 1952, now say something else. Something in a language that might be Latin, might be something much older. The letters seem to move when I'm not looking directly at them, rearranging themselves into patterns that make my eyes water. You want to know why we keep Unit 23? Brennan asks, lighting a cigarette with shaking hands. Department policy says no smoking in the cruisers, but I don't think department policy covers whatever this is. It's not nostalgia. It's necessity. This car, it knows the route, the real route, the one they don't put on any map. The cigarette smoke doesn't behave like smoke should. Instead of dispersing, it hangs in the air, forming shapes. Faces, buildings, a map of streets that exist only on Saturday nights, only for those who know how to look. The smoke fills the cabin, and for a moment I swear it takes shapes, faces, all of them screaming. Every town has one, he continues. A gap, a wound, whatever you want to call it. Ours opens every Saturday night at 2:47 a.m., stays open until dawn, and someone has to patrol it. Someone has to make sure nothing gets out. Gets out? He laughs, but there's no humor in it. You think the things in the back seat are bad? They're just passengers. Hitchhikers. The real problems are the ones that try to cross over. Use our world as a highway to somewhere else. As if on cue, I hear breathing behind me. Slow. Wet. Like someone with fluid in their lungs. Every instinct tells me to turn around, but I remember the rule. Mirror only. In the reflection I see her. A woman in a wedding dress, pristine white except for the dark stains spreading across her chest. She's beautiful in that small-town way, like every homecoming queen who never left. Her lips move, mouthing words I can't hear but somehow understand. He said he'd wait for me. Sarah Henderson, Brennan says quietly, died on her wedding night in 1963. Fiancé's car went off Miller's Bridge. She's harmless, just lonely. The woman, Sarah, reaches forward. Her hand passes through the barrier between front and back, and for a moment her fingers brush my shoulder. They're ice cold and desperate. Don't engage, Brennan warns. They can't hurt you if you don't engage. But Sarah's not trying to hurt me. She's trying to warn me. Her mouth opens wider, and this time I can hear her. He's not who he says he is. Before I can process this, the radio explodes with sound. Not one voice, but dozens, all talking at once. Officers calling in their positions, all of them wrong, all of them impossible. Unit 15 at the corner of yesterday and tomorrow. Unit 8 responding to a 1054 at the house that hasn't been built yet. Unit 23. Unit 23, this is Unit 23. You're in my seat, you're wearing my face. That last one makes Brennan slam on the brakes. We skid to a stop in the middle of an intersection I don't recognize. The street signs are blank. Not missing, blank. Like someone forgot to fill them in. "Get out," Brennan says. "What? Get out." I fumble with the door handle, but it won't budge. The locks are engaged, but when I reach for the switch, my hand passes right through it. That's when I realize. I can see through my hand. Just a little, just enough. "Oh God," I whisper. "Oh God, You're not dead," Brennan says, but he won't look at me. "Not yet, but you're close. Closer than you should be. This is wrong. You shouldn't be able to ride along. Civilians can't enter the gap unless..." He trails off, finally turning to look at me. Really look at me. His eyes widen. "Unless they're already marked," he finishes. Jesus Christ, kid, what did you do? Who did you talk to? I want to answer, but Sarah's still in the back seat and now she's not alone. There's a man in a suit, his face hidden by shadow. A child in pajamas holding a teddy bear with no eyes. An elderly woman knitting something that might be a scarf or might be intestines. They're all staring at me. They're all smiling. And outside the car, in the distance, I hear sirens. But not normal sirens. These sound like they're being played backward, getting louder and softer in patterns that hurt to follow. "They're coming," Brennan says. "The real patrol. The ones who've been doing this route since before there was a Millbrook, since before there was an America. And if they find you here," he doesn't finish. He doesn't need to, because I can see them now. Headlights in the mirror, approaching fast. But the lights are wrong. Too many of them. Arranged in patterns that make my eyes water, and between us and them, standing in the middle of the road, is another Officer Brennan. Same face, same uniform. But this one's smile is too wide, and his badge number keeps changing every time I blink. "Choose," both Brennans say in unison. "Choose who's real. Choose who you trust. Because in about 30 seconds, one of us is going to try to kill you and the other's going to try to save you. But here's the thing." They both laugh, the sound echoing off buildings that shouldn't exist. "We don't know which is which either." 28 seconds. That's what I have to figure out which Brennan is real. The one beside me grips the steering wheel. The one outside stands perfectly still. Rain that started from nowhere running off his uniform. 25 seconds. Sarah Henderson leans forward in the back seat. "The real one bleeds," she whispers. "The real one remembers." 20 seconds. "Tell me about your daughter," I say to the Brennan beside me. "I don't have a..." He stops, blinks. Jenny, she's 12, loves basketball, has her mother's eyes. 15 seconds. I turn to the window. "What about you?" I shout to the other Brennan. He tilts his head. Jenny, she's 12, loves basketball, has her mother's eyes, word for word, same inflection, like a recording. 10 seconds. The approaching headlights are so close now I can see the vehicle. It's another Plymouth Fury. Unit 23, but older, rustier, like it's been driving these streets since 1975 and never stopped. 5 seconds. I make my choice. I grab Brennan's, the one beside me, coffee cup and smash it against his hand. He yelps, jerks back. Blood wells from the cut. The other Brennan doesn't react at all. "Drive!" I scream. He floors it just as the other Unit 23 reaches us, but instead of colliding, we pass through each other. For a moment that lasts forever, I see inside the other car. It's Brennan, but old, ancient, his uniform rotted to threads, his badge rusted to nothing, He's been driving this route for decades, maybe longer, and in his passenger seat, it's me, also old, also rotted, also still driving. That's the trick, my Brennan, the real one, the bleeding one, says as we speed away. Every Saturday night someone has to patrol, but sometimes the patrol never ends. Sometimes you get stuck in the loop. The other Unit 23 makes a U-turn behind us, gives chase. But we're not alone. The streets are filling with them now. Dozens of Unit 23s, all from different years, all with the same two people inside. Brennan and a passenger. Always Brennan and a passenger. How many times have we done this? I ask. First time, he says. Every time is the first time. That's another rule. You don't remember the other loops, not fully, just glimpses, like déjà vu, but worse. Sarah's still in the back seat, but the others are gone. Miller's Bridge, she says urgently. You have to get to Miller's Bridge. That's where you died, I say. That's where everyone dies, she corrects. Or lives, depending on which choice you make. Brennan jerks the wheel hard right, tires screaming. We're on River Road now, the dark water of Millbrook Reservoir running alongside us. Miller's Bridge looms ahead, its old iron framework like bones against the sky. But between us and the bridge, the road is blocked. Not by cars, by people. Hundreds of them, all in different era clothing. 50s, 60s, 70s, all the way up to, is that a 2025 Tesla patch on that uniform? Every cop who ever patrolled the Gap, Brennan breathes. They're all here. Waiting. For what? For us to choose. Cross the bridge, and we get out. Maybe. But something else gets out too, something that's been waiting since 1975 for its chance. Don't cross. And we join them, Eternal Patrol, keeping the Gap contained. What got out in 1975? He looks at me, really looks at me. Who told you about the ride-along program? Who specifically, I think back? It was Officer Henderson. Thomas Henderson. Said he was Sarah's nephew. Brennan goes pale. Sarah never had a nephew. Never had any family at all. She was an orphan. In the back seat, Sarah starts to laugh. But it's not her voice anymore. It's deeper. Older. Hungry. 49 years, she says in that wrong voice. 49 years I've been sending riders. 49 years of Saturday nights. And finally, someone figured out the rules enough to get this far. Her face melts like wax, revealing something underneath that my mind won't quite process. Too many teeth. Not enough skin. Eyes in places eyes shouldn't be. I'm not Sarah Henderson, it says. Sarah Henderson was my first meal when I crawled out of the Gap in 1963, but her form, her story, it was so useful, so tragic. Everyone trusts a ghost in a wedding dress. What are you? I manage to ask. Hungry, it replies. And you're going to feed me. Drive across the bridge, Officer Brennan. Complete the route. Let me out into the real Millbrook. The sun's almost up. The Gap's almost closed. This is my last chance for another 49 years. Brennan's hands shake on the wheel. If I don't, then you join them. It gestures to the crowd of eternal patrollers. Forever. But here's the beautiful part. Your partner already chose. I feel it then. The weight in my hand. I look down and see I'm holding Brennan's service weapon. I don't remember picking it up. That's not me. The thing wearing Sarah's face says, that's all you. Some part of you already knows what has to happen. The Gap needs a guardian, someone to drive the route. And it can't be Brennan. He's too old, too tired. He's been fighting this for 17 years. Since 2008, I say, understanding flooding through me. Since the last time someone almost let you out. Smart boy, but not smart enough. You see, the gun won't kill me, can't kill me, but it can kill him, and once he's dead, you'll be the only one who knows the route, the only one who can keep me contained, forever. Or I could shoot you, I say, raising the gun. It laughs. You could try. But bullets don't work on things like me. And the moment you pull that trigger, the moment you choose violence, you become part of the gap, permanent resident, no escape, ever. The crowd of patrol cars behind us is getting closer. I can see their faces now, all the same expression, resigned, defeated, eternal. Choose, the thing says. Kill Brennan and take his place, or cross the bridge and let me feed. Those are your only options. But there's something it doesn't know, something I've been hiding since I got in this car. The reason I could enter the gap, the reason I could see the truth. There's a third option, I say, and I turn the gun on myself. The thing wearing Sarah's face screams as I pull the trigger, but the gun just clicks. Empty. It was always empty. That's when Brennan starts laughing. 49 years, he says. 49 years, and you fall for the same trick every time. The thing in the back seat flickers, confused. What? You're not the only one who can wear faces, Brennan says. And his face shifts, just a little, just enough for me to see what's underneath. Not a monster, not a demon, something else, something older, something that was here before the town, before the country, before humans gave names to their fears. You're not Brennan, I say. I am tonight. I'm Brennan every Saturday night when someone needs to patrol the gap. Just like I was Henderson when I recruited you. Just like I was Sarah when she died on that bridge in 1963. You're the gap, I realize. I'm the guardian, he corrects. The gap's jail cell. Its warden, and every 49 years it tries to escape. Sends out its tendrils, looking for a weak point. A soul it can corrupt, a body it can possess. The thing in the back seat snarls, "You can't hold me forever." One day, someone will choose wrong. Maybe, the guardian wearing Brennan's face agrees, but not tonight. He turns the key. The engine dies. And suddenly, we're not moving anymore. We're parked outside the Millbrook Police Department. The clock on the dashboard reads 5:47 a.m. The sun's coming up, painting the sky purple and gold. "That's impossible," I stammer. "We were just—" "The gap's closed," he says simply. "Until next Saturday. And the Saturday after that. And after that." The thing in the back seat is fading now, becoming translucent. "This isn't over," it hisses. "I'll find another way, another rider, another—" It vanishes mid-sentence. The back seat's empty, clean, like nothing was ever there. The guardian turns to me. In the dawn light, he looks exactly like Officer Mike Brennan should look. Tired, middle-aged, human. "You did good, kid," he says. "Most riders panic, pull the trigger for real, or try to run, but you figured out the game. What happens now?" I ask. "Now? Now you go home. Forget this happened, live your life, and never, ever sign up for another ride-along. But what about you?" He smiles, but it's sad. "I'll be here. Every Saturday night. That's my choice, my purpose. Has been since long before this town had a name." I reach for the door handle, then stop. The real Brennan, is he? There is no real Brennan. Never was. I created him 17 years ago when the last guardian retired. Gave him a history, a family, a life. It makes the town feel safer, knowing there's a veteran cop watching over them. That's lonely. "Yes," he agrees. "It is." I get out of the car, my legs shaky. The parking lot's real, solid, normal. Other officers are arriving for the morning shift. None of them look at Unit 23. It's like they can't even see it. "Hey," I call back. "What about Tommy Martinez?" "Unit 19, is he?" The Guardian checks his watch. Tommy Martinez is home with his wife and baby daughter. He never worked last night. Unit 19 was in the shop for repairs. But you heard what the Gap wanted you to hear, what it needed you to believe to make you afraid. Fear makes people stupid, makes them choose wrong. He starts the engine. The old V8 purrs like it's brand new. "Wait," I say. "One more question. Why 49 years? Why that specific number?" He thinks for a moment. 7 sevens, a complete cycle. Some patterns are older than math itself. They just are. As he pulls away, I notice something. The license plate on Unit 23, it's not a standard police plate. It's older, much older. The numbers keep shifting, changing, like they can't decide what year they're from. But just before the car turns the corner, they settle on something that makes my blood run cold. 1975 to 2024. That's not a date range. That's a countdown. I never told anyone about that night. Who would believe me? But sometimes, on Saturday nights, I drive past the police station around 2:47 a.m. Unit 23 is always gone, out on patrol. And sometimes, if I listen carefully to my radio, I can hear it. Through the static, past the normal chatter, breathing, waiting, counting down. They say every town has a gap, a wound, a place where reality gets thin. Millbrook has Unit 23 to patrol ours, to keep it contained. But I can't help wondering, what happens to the towns that don't? What happens when there's no one left to drive the route? What happens when the 49 years are up? I guess we'll find out next year, won't we? If you're listening to this, if you made it this far, check your clock. What time is it? Is it 2:47 a.m.? Is it Saturday night? Are you sure you're awake? Are you sure you're in your bed and not in the passenger seat of a 1975 Plymouth Fury, driving through streets that don't exist, with someone who might not be who they say they are? Next time you hear sirens in the distance on a Saturday night, count them. If you hear more than you should, if they sound like they're coming from nowhere and everywhere at once, pull your covers up tight. Close your eyes, and whatever you do, don't volunteer for a ride-along. Some routes were never meant to be traveled. Some gaps were never meant to be filled. And some stories were never meant to end. Pleasant dreams, Millbrook, the Guardian's still out there. Watching, waiting, driving. For now. Story number 4. Listen closely, because what I'm about to tell you happened last Tuesday night. And before you think this is just another urban legend from Chicago, I have the torn piece of a 1952 subway map in my wallet to prove it. The edges are still warm to the touch, like the metal rails that shouldn't exist anymore. You see, I found something that runs beneath Chicago, something that uses tracks the city tore up 70 years ago. And the worst part? I think it's been looking for passengers. But wait, let me ask you something first. When was the last time you heard a train whistle at 3:47 a.m.? Not just any whistle, but one that sounds like it's coming from beneath your basement floor. If you have, then you already know what I'm talking about. And you should probably stop listening now. Still here? Good, because someone needs to know what really happens when you follow that sound. The story begins now. My name is Marcus Chen, and I've lived in Chicago's Lincoln Park neighborhood for 12 years. Same brownstone apartment, 3rd floor, right above Mrs. Rodriguez, who makes the best tamales on North Halsted Street. I'm telling you these normal details because I need you to understand. I'm not some conspiracy theorist. I work at a Target distribution center. I watch the Cubs lose every summer. I'm just regular. That Tuesday started like any other. October rain hammering the windows. That kind of Chicago cold that gets into your bones, even inside. I'd been having trouble sleeping for about a week. Not insomnia exactly, but this feeling like I was waiting for something. You know that sensation when you're sure you've forgotten something important but can't remember what? Around 3:30 a.m., I gave up trying to sleep and made coffee. The old radiator was clanking. Typical for a building from 1928. But then I heard it. Beneath the radiator noise, beneath the rain, beneath even the hum of the refrigerator. A train whistle. Now, the Brown Line runs about 4 blocks from my place, but this wasn't that electronic horn they use now. This was steam, deep and mournful, like something from an old movie, and it was coming from below. I pressed my ear to the floor. The hardwood was cold against my cheek, and I could hear it clearer. Not just the whistle, but wheels on tracks. That rhythmic clacking. You know the sound. But here's the thing. There's no subway under my building. The nearest tunnel is the Red Line, and that's almost a mile east. The sound lasted maybe 30 seconds. Then nothing. Just the rain and the radiator again. I should have left it alone. Should have convinced myself it was pipes or some acoustic trick. But that feeling of waiting for something, it got stronger. Like whatever I'd been expecting had finally announced itself. The next night, same time, 3:47 a.m. exactly, the whistle came again. This time I was ready with my phone recording. But when I played it back, just static. The kind that makes your teeth ache. By the 4th night, I'd done my research. See, Chicago had a whole different subway system planned in the 1940s and 50s. Lines that would have connected neighborhoods in ways that seem strange now. They actually started construction on some of them, dug tunnels, laid tracks, then abandoned it all when the city ran out of money. Most people don't know there are sealed tunnel entrances all over Chicago. Bricked up, forgotten, hidden behind false walls in basements and utility rooms. The city doesn't like to talk about them. Liability issues, they say. I found an old forum post from 2011. Someone claiming their grandfather worked on those abandoned tunnels. Said they'd sealed them for a reason that had nothing to do with money. Said something was wrong with the tracks, that they seemed to go places that weren't on any map. Places that couldn't exist in the space they occupied. The post had been deleted, but the internet never really forgets anything, does it? On the 7th night, I didn't wait in my apartment. I went down to the basement of my building, past the laundry room, past the storage units full of Christmas decorations and old furniture, to the very back where the foundation meets raw earth. Mrs. Rodriguez was there. She was standing in her nightgown, facing the wall, swaying slightly like she was listening to music only she could hear. When I called her name, she turned, and her eyes were completely black. Not the iris, everything. Like looking into empty subway tunnels. "It's coming," she whispered. "The last car. It's finally coming for passengers." Then she blinked, and her eyes were normal again, brown and confused. She asked me in Spanish what we were doing in the basement, but I could tell she knew. There was something in the way she hurried back upstairs, the way she kept looking over her shoulder. At exactly 3:47 a.m., the wall began to crack. The crack started small, just a hairline fracture in the concrete. But with each pulse of that impossible whistle, it grew wider. Dust fell like snow in the dim basement light, and behind the crumbling wall, darkness that seemed to breathe. I should have run. Every instinct in my body screamed to get out, to call someone, to do anything but step through that opening. But you don't understand the pull. It wasn't curiosity. It was like the darkness was specifically shaped for me, like it had been waiting. I turned on my phone's flashlight and stepped through. The space beyond shouldn't have existed. I know the layout of our building, know exactly where the neighboring brownstone's foundation should be. But instead, there was a corridor, red brick walls sweating with moisture, ceiling just high enough that I didn't have to duck, and that smell, like old pennies and something sweet gone bad. The corridor sloped down, gradual at first, then steeper. My footsteps echoed wrong, sometimes too loud, sometimes swallowed completely like the sound just disappeared mid-air. After maybe 50 feet, though distance felt strange down there, the corridor opened up. I found myself standing on a subway platform, but not like any CTA platform I'd ever seen. This was old, older than the system Chicago actually built. Art Deco tile work on the walls, brass fixtures turned green with age, advertisements behind glass for products I'd never heard of. Drink Moxie for vigor. Smoke Commanders, the gentleman's choice. Visit beautiful Gary, Indiana, the city of tomorrow. The platform stretched into darkness in both directions. The trackbed was there, 2 rails gleaming despite what should have been decades of rust. They looked wet, like they'd just been polished. And the strangest part? They were warm. I could feel heat radiating from them. That's when I noticed the other waiting passengers. At first, I thought they were homeless people who'd somehow found this place. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized something was wrong with how they stood. Too still, like mannequins. There were maybe a dozen of them spread along the platform, men in fedoras and wool coats, women in dresses that looked like they were from the 1950s, even a kid in knee shorts and suspenders. None of them moved. None of them breathed that I could see. But their eyes tracked me as I walked past. I approached one of them, an elderly man in a conductor's uniform. His badge read, CTA, Chicago Transit Authority, but the logo was wrong. Older. His face was pale like paper, and when I got close enough, I could see dust in the creases of his skin. "Excuse me," I said, and my voice sounded too loud in the silence. "What is this place?" He didn't answer, but his mouth moved, just slightly, like he was trying to remember how to speak. A wheeze came out, dry as October leaves. "Last car." Then I heard it. That whistle again. But now it was coming from the tunnel to my left, getting closer. The rails began to hum, then sing, then scream with the approaching weight. The other passengers suddenly animated, not naturally, but in jerky, stuttering movements like film-skipping frames. They all turned toward the tunnel, waiting, and I found myself turning too, even though every rational part of my brain was shrieking to run. A single headlight pierced the darkness, but the light was wrong. Too yellow, too thick, like it was shining through amber. The train that emerged from that tunnel, God, how do I even describe it? It was a single subway car, but not like the modern ones. This looked like something from the 1940s, all curved metal and Art Deco styling. The number on the front read 1952, but underneath, in smaller text, Final Run. The car was pristine on one side, gleaming silver and blue, but the other side was rusted through in places, and through those holes I could see things moving. Not mechanical things. Living things. Writhing things. The car screeched to a stop perfectly aligned with the platform. The doors hissed open with a sound like a dying breath. The interior lights flickered on, warm and inviting, showing velvet seats and polished brass poles. The other passengers began boarding. Their movements were more fluid now, more human, but still wrong somehow, like they were remembering how to be people. The conductor I'd spoken to turned to me. His face had more color now, but his eyes were still empty. "Last car," he said more clearly. "Running the abolished route. Only runs for those who hear the call." I looked into the car. The passengers who'd boarded were sitting now, facing forward, completely still again. But in the reflections in the windows, I could see them as they really were, or had been. Their faces were different in the glass, younger, more alive, but also terrified, like they were screaming silently in their own reflections. "Where does it go?" I asked. The conductor smiled, and his teeth were black as subway tunnels. "Where it's always gone. The places between places. The Chicago that should have been. The stations they built in spaces that don't quite fit in this world. It runs on schedule, every night since 1952, picking up those who hear the whistle." The car's bell chimed. Last call for boarding. I didn't mean to step onto that car. I swear I didn't. But my feet moved on their own, like the platform itself was tilting, sliding me toward those open doors. The moment I crossed the threshold, the temperature dropped 20 degrees, and my breath came out in clouds that hung in the air too long. The doors slammed shut behind me with finality that made my chest tight. Through the windows, I could see the conductor still on the platform, waving with that horrible black-toothed smile as we pulled away. But his wave was backwards, like a film running in reverse. Inside the car, everything looked normal at first. Just an old subway car with about 15 passengers, all sitting quietly, facing forward. The seats were that scratchy velvet that picked up every piece of lint. The floor was that speckled rubber that hid dirt so well. Even the advertisements above the windows looked authentic. "Winston tastes good like a cigarette should. Visit Marshall Fields for the holidays." But look closer, and things started to break down. The woman in the nurse's uniform. Her cap was pristine white, but her hands were backwards, thumbs where her pinkies should be. The businessman reading the Tribune. The date on his paper kept changing. October 15th, 1952. November 3rd, 1967. December 25th, 1981. Dates flickering like a broken TV channel. And the kid, God, the kid in the shorts and suspenders. He was humming something. Took me a minute to recognize it. The ice cream truck song, but in a minor key that made my teeth ache. I grabbed one of the poles to steady myself as the car picked up speed. The metal was ice cold and slightly sticky, like it was coated in something that hadn't quite dried. When I pulled my hand away, my palm had black marks that looked like fingerprints, but not mine. Someone else's. Many someone else's. The train was moving faster now, impossibly fast. The tunnel walls outside were a blur, but every now and then I'd catch a glimpse of something. Other platforms. But wrong. One was full of people in Civil War uniforms. Another had cars from the 1920s parked right on the platform. And one was underwater, with things swimming past that had too many eyes. First time? I nearly jumped out of my skin. The voice came from right beside me. A young woman in a red coat had appeared in the seat I could have sworn was empty seconds ago. She looked normal, pretty even, except her shadow was moving independently from her body. What is this?" I managed. She laughed, but the sound came from somewhere behind me, even though she was right there. "The last car. It runs the routes they planned but never built. The connections between Chicago that was, Chicago that is, and Chicago that might have been. Some of us have been riding for, well, time works differently here. How long have you been on this train?" She thought about it, or pretended to. "I got on in 1963, I think. Or was it 1996? It's hard to tell. The car shows you different years depending on which window you look through. See?" She pointed to the windows on the left side of the car. I looked and gasped. Outside wasn't the tunnel anymore. It was Chicago, but Chicago in full daylight. The skyline was wrong, though. Buildings that didn't exist, or didn't exist anymore. The Sears Tower was there, but it was twisted into a spiral. The lake was on the wrong side. "Now look right," she said. The right windows showed Chicago too, but at night, and it was burning. The whole city was on fire, but the flames were frozen, like a photograph of disaster. And in the sky, something huge and dark with wings that shouldn't exist on anything that big. "That's the Chicago that almost was," she whispered. 1871. The fire was supposed to take everything, but something stopped it. This train, it carries the possibilities, all the Chicagos that could have been. The train lurched, and suddenly we were in a station, but not stopped. We were passing through it slowly, like a tour. The platform was packed with people, all dressed differently. Different decades, different centuries even. They were all trying to board, pressing against an invisible barrier, their mouths open in silent screams. "The ones who missed their chance," the woman explained. "They heard the whistle, but didn't board. Now they wait at the impossible stations, hoping the car will stop again. It never does. How do I get off?" My voice cracked with panic. She tilted her head, and for a second I saw her skull through her skin like an X-ray. "Get off? Oh, honey. The last car only stops at one station, the final one. And you really don't want to see that station. Trust me. I've been avoiding it since whenever I got on." The businessman with the changing newspaper suddenly stood up. His movements were mechanical, joint by joint like a marionette. He walked to the front of the car and pulled the emergency cord. Nothing happened. He pulled it again and again, faster and faster until his arm was a blur. Then he started screaming, but no sound came out. Just his mouth stretching wider and wider until I could see rows of teeth going back into his throat like a tunnel. "He does that every few stops," the woman said casually. "Been trying to get off since Pearl Harbor, or was it 9/11? Time really doesn't." The lights in the car went out. In the darkness, I could hear things moving. Wet sounds, clicking sounds, breathing that had too many lungs behind it. Something brushed my ankle, something with too many joints. When the lights flickered back on, we were in a different car. Same layout, but older. Much older. The advertisements were from the 1890s. The passengers were different too. Men in Union Army uniforms, women in bustled dresses, and in the very back, something in a plague doctor mask that didn't move like anything human. "The car changes," the woman said, but her voice was different now, older, tired. "Shows different versions of itself, past, present, future, and the versions that never were. We're approaching the junction." "What junction?" "Where all the abandoned lines meet, where all the possible Chicagos converge. It's beautiful and terrible. You'll see." The train began to slow. Outside the windows I could see tracks, dozens of them, hundreds, all converging on a single point ahead. Some were modern steel, some were old iron, some seemed to be made of bone. Some were transparent, like glass, with things moving inside them. We were approaching a massive station, bigger than any I'd ever seen. The architecture was impossible. Art Deco mixed with Gothic, mixed with something alien. Platforms at different levels, some upside down, some at angles that hurt to look at. And on every platform, trains. Hundreds of subway cars from different eras, all stopped, all dark except for ours. We were the only ones still moving, still lit, still carrying whatever we were carrying. "Grand Central of the never was," the woman whispered. "This is where it happens. Where you choose. Choose what?" But I already knew. I could feel it in the way the air pressure changed, in the way my heartbeat synced with the rhythm of the rails, in the way the other passengers were all turning to look at me with eyes that reflected too many possibilities. The last car slowed to a crawl as we entered the impossible station. Grand Central of the never was stretched out in all directions, up, down, and in dimensions that shouldn't exist. My eyes couldn't properly process what I was seeing. Stairs that led up but somehow ended up below. Platforms that existed in the same space but different times. And everywhere, those dead trains, dark and waiting. "This is where you decide," the woman in red said. Her face kept shifting now. Young, old, skeletal, beautiful, all at once. "Every passenger has to choose eventually." The train stopped, but the doors didn't open. Instead, the conductor's voice crackled over the intercom. But it wasn't just one voice, it was dozens, all speaking in unison. Some in English, some in languages I didn't recognize, some in sounds that weren't quite words. Final stop. All passengers must choose. Remain on the last car for another cycle, or disembark at your destination. "What destination?" I shouted at the intercom. The other passengers were standing now, moving toward me in that stuttering, frame-skipping way. The businessman with his endless newspaper. The backwards-handed nurse. The humming child. Even things I hadn't noticed before. A woman whose face was a subway map. A man made entirely of ticket stubs. Something in the corner that was just shadows pretending to have form. "Your destination," they said in unison, their voices creating harmonics that made my nose bleed. "The Chicago you belong to." The windows started showing different scenes, each one a different Chicago, a different life, a different choice. In one window, I saw myself back in my apartment, waking up from what seemed like a bad dream. Mrs. Rodriguez bringing me tamales, laughing about the strange noises old buildings make. A normal life, safe. But I could see the timestamp in the corner. 3:47 a.m. every single day, frozen forever. In another, I was in a Chicago where the abandoned tunnels were never abandoned, where the city grew down instead of up, where I worked as a conductor on trains that connected not just neighborhoods but dimensions. I looked happy, but my eyes were black as subway tunnels. A third window, Chicago was gone. Just gone. And I was standing in the ruins, one of the few who remembered it had ever existed. Because I'd been on the last car when reality shifted. "Choose," the woman in red urged, "before the car chooses for you." I looked at each passenger, really looked at them, and I understood. They'd all chosen to stay, too afraid of their destinations to disembark. The businessman chose to stay rather than face a Chicago where the market crashed and he lost everything. The nurse chose to stay rather than return to a Chicago where the pandemic she was fleeing was worse than death. The child chose to stay rather than go back to whatever was waiting for him at home. "How long have you all been here?" I asked. "Time doesn't..." The woman in red started. "No," I cut her off. "How long?" She was quiet for a moment, then, in a voice that sounded truly human for the first time, "I died in 1963. Heart attack on the platform waiting for the 5:15, but I heard the whistle, and I got on anyway, because even this is better than..." She didn't finish. She didn't have to. The train lurched, starting to move again. The doors still hadn't opened. "Wait," I shouted. "I haven't chosen." "Then the car has chosen for you," the conductor's many voices announced. "Welcome to the eternal route. Next stop, 1952, 1967, 1981, 1999, 2001, 2020, and all the years between and beyond." I ran to the doors, pulled at them, slammed my fists against them. They wouldn't budge. Outside, the station was sliding away. All those dead trains getting smaller. All those possible Chicagos fading. But then I remembered something. Something Mrs. Rodriguez had whispered as she ran back upstairs that night. El tren solo tiene poder si crees en las vías. The train only has power if you believe in the rails. I closed my eyes, focused on my apartment, on the real Chicago, the one where the Cubs lose and the winter is too cold and the pizza is too thick and everything is perfectly, boringly normal. I thought about my job at Target, about the brown line that actually existed, about the coffee I'd made that night that was probably still sitting on my counter, cold and forgotten. I stopped believing in the impossible rails. The train screamed, metal grinding against metal and sparks flying, the other passengers wailing in voices that had forgotten how to be human. The woman in red grabbed my arm, her fingers ice cold and desperate. "You can't! If you stop believing, we all..." I pulled away and threw myself at the doors. They shattered like sugar glass. I fell through darkness, through space that wasn't space, through time that moved in all directions at once. I saw flashes of Chicago, all the Chicagos. The one that burned, the one that drowned, the one that reached the stars, the one that never was. And then I woke up on the basement floor. Concrete under my cheek. 6:47 a.m. according to my phone. The wall was solid. No crack, no passage. No evidence of anything except a strange dream, except for the torn piece of 1952 subway map in my pocket. Still warm, still impossible. With a route drawn in red ink that connected stations that never existed, and a handwritten note on the back. The last car runs every night. 3:47 a.m. For those who hear the whistle, for those who need to escape, for those who choose to ride. We're still here, still traveling, still waiting. And one night, you'll hear the whistle again, and you'll wonder, what if you'd stayed? It's signed by 12 names. Different handwriting, different inks. The businessman, the nurse, the child. The woman in red whose real name was apparently Margaret Walsh. I moved out of that apartment the next week. Told everyone it was about the rent going up. But really, I couldn't stand the waiting. Every night at 3:30, I'd be awake, listening. Terrified I'd hear it again. And more terrified that I wanted to. I live in the suburbs now, far from any train lines, far from any basements that might crack open. But sometimes, usually on rainy October nights like this one, I check that map. It's changed. New routes appear, new stations, and sometimes, in the corner, new signatures. Mrs. Rodriguez's name appeared last week. So, here's my question for you, and think carefully before you answer, because your response might matter more than you know. Have you ever heard a train whistle at 3:47 a.m.? A sound that shouldn't exist from tracks that were torn up decades ago? Because if you have, if you've heard that steam whistle from the last car, then you have a choice to make. You can ignore it. Pretend it's nothing. Move to the suburbs like I did and hope the sound doesn't follow. Or you can go down to your basement. Look for the crack that will appear. Step through into that impossible corridor. The last car is still running, every night, through the abandoned tunnels of Chicago, through the spaces between what was and what might be, picking up passengers who need to escape, or who just need to ride. And every passenger has the same choice: stay on the eternal route, or get off at a station you might not survive. I made my choice. I chose the boring, normal world. But on nights like this, when the rain sounds like wheels on rails, when the wind sounds like a whistle, I wonder about Margaret and the others, still riding, still choosing to stay rather than face their destinations. And I wonder, what was so terrible about their stops that an eternal subway ride seemed better? I guess I'll never know, unless I hear that whistle again. And next time I might just have enough courage, or enough desperation, to get back on. The map is still warm in my pocket. Still impossible, still calling. And somewhere beneath Chicago, on rails that shouldn't exist, the last car runs its eternal route, waiting for passengers who hear the whistle, waiting for those who need to escape, waiting for you. Did you hear that? Just now? That sound beneath the rain? That's not your radiator. That's not your pipes. That's the 3:47 a.m. whistle of the last car. And now that you've heard this story, now that you know it exists, you'll hear it too. Tonight. Tomorrow. Some night when you least expect it. The question is, when you hear it, what will you choose? Will you pull your covers tighter and pretend it's nothing? Or will you follow that sound down, down, down to where the last car waits? Choose carefully, because once you board, well, just ask Mrs. Rodriguez. If you can find her, sweet dreams. And whatever you do, don't listen for trains tonight. Especially not at 3:47 a.m. Because the last car always has room for one more passenger. Always. Tell me, did this story make you want to check your basement? Did it make you wonder about the sounds in your building at night? Leave a comment below if you've ever heard something that shouldn't exist. Something like a train where no train should be. And if you want to hear more true stories from the impossible corners of America, stories that will keep you wondering what's real and what's waiting in the darkness, subscribe and hit that notification bell. Because the next story might be about your neighborhood, your city, your own impossible midnight encounter. Until then, sleep tight and try not to listen too carefully to the sounds in the walls. The last car is always running, always searching, always ready for new passengers. Perhaps, tonight, it's searching for you.